Joining himself. In the Greek it speaks of to glue. We all know what glue is. Glue. I read somewhere recently, a brother dared another boy in some country to kiss a frozen pipe. And of course, and his lips were stuck. And the authorities had to come and help this poor little boy, no doubt terrified, because he was glued to that frozen pipe with his lips. In Colossians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, talks about believers having been knit together in love. Knitted together in love. So as we talk about soul ties, we may not use that word, but here are Bible terms about cleaving, about being knitted to. So the Bible really has much to say about this realm. So what is a soul tie? A soul tie is the knitting together of two souls in the spirit realm. It's a knitting together of two souls in the spirit realm. And as we've seen in Genesis 2:23, leaving to cleave. 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 1 talks about David and Jonathan. And it simply says their souls were knit together. Now, when I went to New Zealand last year, not having been there for 26 years, I met friends I hadn't seen for 26 years. But it was almost like we'd never been away from one another. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, we used to do things together as young Christian people. We served God together, we prayed together, we had fun together. And even though we'd not met for so many years, it was like there was still a joining of our hearts in some way. It's wonderful to have those kind of friendships, and we all need those friendships, good friendships. And the soul of Jonathan and David were knit together. And then in Joshua 23, verses 8 to 13, God is warning his people about being joined to idols, but cleave to the Lord your God. Verse 8, and this word cleave is the same as in Genesis 2. Verse 12, if you ever go back and cling to the gods of these nations, talking about clinging to an idol. And when people cling to an idol, it's not just a wooden idol, a stone idol, it's a spirit behind that idol. Because when people bow down and make offerings to idols, they're actually making offerings to other spirits, whether they realize it or not. So idolatry should not be part of our life as believers. So what is joined together? Man's soul consists of his mind, will, and emotions. And there can be the joining of minds and wills around a shared philosophy, religion, a task, a vision. There can be emotional unions in the feeling realm, such as affection and devotion or obligation. Soul ties can be strong, they can be weak. But sadly, there can be unhealthy soul ties, and this is the purpose of this message this morning. An unhealthy soul tie, whether it be with friends, parents, children, siblings, marriage partners, former romantic or sexual partners, domineering authorities, can bring about a control that will adversely affect our lives. Thank God for the good joinings, the good soul ties, but sadly there can be the wrong kind of soul ties that can bring trouble to us and others and can bring control, such as a parent who refuses to relinquish hold on their adult children. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to us. No one in Canada is like this. I remember when my wife and I first moved to Sydney, Australia. We were in an apartment block of 4, and we're on the top floor, and the other apartment was, there were Christians in there who went to the same church as we went to. And they'd only been married just a few months. And so the day came, out came the wedding photographs. Now, wedding photographs are usually nice to look at, are they not? People are happy, people are smiling. But I saw a wedding photo that I'd never seen before. And if I happen to have that kind of wedding photo, I might just happen to have a sharp-pointed object in my hand and just happen to have an accident, and that pen would go into the face of one of the people in the photograph. Maybe. So here's the extended family in the photograph. The bride, the groom, and next to the groom was his mother. And everyone was smiling. But his mother She looked absolutely miserable. She spoiled the whole picture. She didn't want her little boy to go. Folks, as parents, we've got to let our kids make their own choices. They're big people now. And we often learn by making mistakes sometimes too, don't we? Anyone ever made a mistake? It's a bit embarrassing to raise your hand. Look, in 1975 I made a mistake, so I may understand. But here was a mother, and there was no dad on the scene, but a mother who didn't want her only son to be involved in another relationship. Poor me, it was just self-pity. Self-pity was oozing out of that woman, as far as the photograph is concerned. How sad. How sad. I was in Eastern Europe, and I was staying with a young couple who had only been married, this was probably about May, they'd been married the summer before. I had met them the year before, they were engaged, and the fiancé was my driver for the week. So I knew something of the situation. He spoke English, and he said, you know, my parents, who are Pentecostal pastors, do not want me to marry my fiancé. And my fiancée, her parents were also Pentecostals, didn't want her to marry him. So that wouldn't have been a very pleasant situation. Both sets of parents were against the marriage. You know, and sometimes there can be reasons, good reasons why both sets of parents could be against a marriage. But again, look, people have to make their own choices, folks. Yeah. As our kids get older, we can't think of their thoughts, we can't make their decisions. Yeah. And so he told me both sets of parents were against the marriage. Well, next year I was there and I was staying in their apartment and they were married. And I didn't realise at the time, but this woman was quite brilliant. And she was in university. And she was on a scholarship to do 2 courses. She could never have afforded to do those courses herself. And I think one was a business degree, and another was to do with Japanese studies and language and everything else. She spoke English. She didn't speak English, she spoke Russian. And I didn't know, but she spoke Japanese. And so, as I was in their home, she spoke to me through her husband. And she said, last year when you were here, you prayed over me in one of the meetings, and you prayed over me in Japanese. And the Lord was prophesying to me. I was just speaking in tongues. And the Lord said to me, I am for this relationship, and I will bless your marriage. Now, both sets of parents were against the marriage. In fact, when the marriage ceremony took place, one set of parents came, the other stayed away. When there was the meal after the ceremony, the other parents came to that meal, the other stayed away. They were showing their disapproval. But listen, God was showing his approval. And a stranger came along, he spoke neither Russian nor Japanese, but spoke in tongues and was just praying in tongues. Unbeknown to me, God was prophesying through me a word from the heart of a Father God, saying, listen, it's going to be okay. I'm for you in this relationship. You can go ahead and get married. This marriage is going to be blessed. How sad when parents would resist. So, a parent who refuses to relinquish hold on their adult children can create a wrong kind of soul tie. A person who refuses to release the memory of an old romantic flame. One of the most embarrassing counseling situations I was in was in Florida years ago. He was a woman. She'd been in a romantic relationship with a guy in California for some years, and the reason she didn't marry him was that he got a young girl pregnant and had to marry her. And so here she was now on the other side of the country, and always talking about this former lover in front of her husband and in front of me, and I felt so sad for this guy. There was something in her heart back in California for that guy, talking about him. He was much better in every way than her husband was, putting her husband down. And she wasn't willing to repent. She wasn't, you know. And I thought, this marriage can't last very long, and it didn't last very long. Because she had never let go that man in California. She was now cleaving to another, but part of her heart was somewhere else. And it was a barrier to the blessing of that marriage. It was a barrier to God working. And sometimes we've got to let go someone or the memory of someone. I was in Norway and youth at the mission base, and I had just dismissed the students to go for lunch. It's around noon, and as they began to go towards the door, God just spoke to me, and I said, hold it. I said, there may be someone here and you love Jesus, but formerly you were in a wrong relationship. That relationship has been broken, but you have letters, love letters from that man. You still have them. You have photographs of that man, that person, and you have them in a drawer, and every so often you open that drawer and you read those love letters, and you look at those photographs, and I said, I believe God is saying to you, you need to destroy those letters and those photographs. You are dismissed for lunch. And a young lady at the very back raised her hand. She said, that's me. You see, there was a hole in her heart. There was still a cleaving to some measure to a former relationship. And in her case, she needed to destroy those photographs and those love letters. You understand? Now, someone may come and say, oh, but I've got pictures of my photo album. I went with this guy and I went with this guy. It's okay, leave them there. But in her case, there was that wrong tie still. And part of getting free was to destroy those love letters and to destroy those photographs. You follow? So she could be free on the inside to develop a new relationship, a godly relationship. Wrong kind of soul ties. Another way in which we can be bound is through holding a grudge or a judgment against another. Another way there can be a wrong soul tie is to a person using spiritual forces to control others, the realm of witchcraft. And when I hear about the Harry Potter books and movies and so on, and these love spells, I mean, there's a dimension where there's the real thing, folks. Yeah. And I've heard of different cultures where an old man will put a love spell on a young woman, and that young woman will obediently come to his hut. It's not natural, but there's a spiritual power seeking to control someone and bringing people into wrong situations. I know of a church that's no longer existing, and it was kind of exclusive, but I was just new in this country, and some friends of mine went to that church, and they had some very, very good teaching. This was a church that believed in deliverance and preached deliverance. And so I asked if I could get some of the teaching tapes from the pastor and the main church that was just in the Seattle area. And they made an exception for me, and because I was living in the country, and I would get the odd tape from that church, and I enjoyed the teachings. But then I heard about some things that troubled me. In fact, my wife and I were coming back from Portland or somewhere, and we stopped in the Seattle area to go to this church on a Sunday night as we were driving home. And there were some things happening kind of strange to me. The women were very, very dressed, these beautiful long dresses. And my wife said, so many women are in the washroom doing their hair. I mean, it was a lot of emphasis for the women, at least on the outward appearance. And then before the pastor, he came in early and he just lay on the platform, and these women came around and they were doing stuff. And so I said to someone, what's happening up there?